please speak up. But I think that's everyone. So then we will go ahead and get started. So just going over what we're going to cover. First, we'll go into just a brief history of voting in the US. Then we'll move into current North Carolina laws and voting barriers, and then solutions and how we can overcome those barriers. And then we'll discuss how you can see that and how it applies to different people's communities. And just wanted to check for other people, are there faces covering the text on the screen, or is that just us?
No, we're seeing it.
Okay, as long as you all can see it, then that's totally fine.
Okay. So first, a little brief history about voting. So since American Founding Day, when voting was limited to white male property owner, to like the Transformative Voting Rights Act of the 1965, to sweeping voting process reformation introduced in the early 2000s, and then to the right to vote in the U.S. election has seen like massive change. We have changed a lot in like years. Voting rights gradually turned into a nonpartisan concern as effort were made at all levels to pass legislation and constitutional amendment expanding voting eligibility based on race, ethnicity, gender, disability, age, and other consideration. Greater voting participation encountered new opposition, and in the 2013, the Supreme Court destroyed the Voting Rights Act in the decision in the Shelby County v. Holder case. It's opened the door for like state and region that have the history of voting suppression to establish tighter voting measurement. Populations that are already underrepresented in politics are negatively impacted by these activities in demonstrable and disproportionate way. Government at all levels have mainly failed to invest in the election to ensure the fairness and effectiveness of the process. So I have a little timeline here of the federal and the state. The state here is North Carolina timeline of voting. So in the pre-Civil War, only white and wealthy men can vote. And then in the 1866, we have the Black Code. And they basically say that free Black men cannot vote. There were strict and local state law that dictate when, where, and how former enslaved people could work, and then how much they get paid for it. The Black Code was like all throughout the South. You can see it everywhere in the South, and it was like a legal way to put Black citizens into indentured servitude. It take away voting right, control where Black people could live, how they can travel, and it's basically a way for child labor to happen. In the 1868, North Carolina passed a constitution that guaranteed universal male suffrage. So at this stage, only white male can vote. Female cannot vote yet. In the 1869 to 1870, there was a rise in the KKK violence, and African American people's life were like in danger, and they had to like move away for their safety. Black schools were vandalized and destroyed, and then white people attacked, tortured, and like lynched Black people. In the 1877, people with felony conviction cannot vote according to a KNC. In the 1898, the big event was the Wilmington Massacre, and it aimed to reestablish the white rule. White supremacists murdered Black people in their neighborhood. They burned out Black businesses, and they drove away recent elected Black official out of the office, and once again forcing Black people to move away for safety. In the 1899, the literacy test was implemented in North Carolina, and it was a way to like weave people out, like weave the people that did not want to vote. In the 1899 all the way to 1965 was the Jim Crow era, and Jim Crow was everywhere in North Carolina at that time. Some example of that was like public park was forbidden for Black people to enter. Some places such as theater, restaurant, hospital, retirement home, waiting room for bus and train station, entrances, elevator, restroom, water fountain, like everything was segregated, and African American people cannot live in white neighborhood. So two major events is the Voting Rights Act of the 1965 and the Shelby County v. Holder. So in 1965, the Voting Rights Act required state and local government with a history of restrictive voting right based on race to submit change to their election law to the U.S. Justice Department for approval. And in addition to prohibiting many of the policy and practice that the state have been using to limit voting among African American and target group. The Voting Rights Act proved to be remarkably effective to prevent the most heinous policy from being implemented, and it discouraged state and local officials from erecting new voting barrier. In the Shelby County v. Holder in the 2013, the Voting Rights Act was like completely overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. And due to the court ruling, it was a 5-4 majority. State and local with history of repressing voting right no longer need to like submit changes to their election law for review. So that means like that was like giving state with like suppression voting history to like go for it. And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that throwing away pre-clearance when it had worked and is continued to work to stop discriminatory change is like throwing away your umbrella in the rainstorm because you are not getting wet. Some voting barrier in North Carolina law and regulation. So in order to register to vote, it's pretty simple and easy. You just have to be a U.S. citizen. You must live in the county you are registered in and reside for at least 30 days. You must be at least 18, and then you must not have any felony conviction. So in the modern day right now, we are actually facing a lot of voting barrier. When you go to vote, like to voting places and booth, you have to like present your ID. There is a lack of language access because not all of us speak English. There's a voter roll purchase, polling place closing or way early than they're supposed to. The lack of funding for election, provisional ballot requirement, reduced early voting, reduced voting hour, poorly trained poll worker, partisan election administrator, and then the creation of at-large office to dilute the minority vote.
All right, so next we're going to be moving into some solutions and how we can overcome those voting barriers. So how do we overcome those barriers? First, you can register to vote and encourage others to do the same. For step-by-step information on how to register, I included a list of resources on the next slide, but I'll move on to that in a bit. You can find more information on how to register to vote on the North Carolina State Board of Elections website. Once you've registered yourself to vote, remind your friends and family to do the same. Have conversations with the people you know and remind them to register to vote around election time. For a greater impact, you can join existing organizations in your community to help spread the word on a larger scale. Look for these organizations on college campuses, local government sources and organizations, or at community resource centers. At our institution, we have HPU Votes, a campus club dedicated to increasing voter registration on campus. Another popular organization is Voter 411, a nonpartisan organization that aims to improve voter registration and knowledge of the voting process. They help voters compare different candidate platforms and make educated decisions. So what communities are you a part of that's this question right here. What communities are you a part of that could have these organizations already? Or is there an opportunity to create an organization in your community? And who could benefit from increased access to voter registration organizations? So with these questions, if you have any ideas that you want to pop into the chat, or if you want to just go off mute right now and let us know what you think. But just what are some communities you're a part of that might have organizations already or that could benefit from organizations like this? And oh, dang it. Adrian?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think voter education is very critical in organizations. I know several organizations on campus right now, UNCG. I don't know the name specifically, but I do know that they were active in the 2022 elections. Also in the greater Greensboro area, there are several organizations where they're different constituency groups like the NAACP, for instance. They had a voter outreach campaign, just a voter education campaign. So I think getting people to vote or getting people registered to vote is one thing, but I think more of a critical component of it is the voter education part of it. That's very critical.
Absolutely. And the NAACP, that's a good one. Does anybody else have any suggestions, organizations that they might have noticed in the community, or places that there could be a need for more organizations like that?
This is Cameron from Lenoir-Rhyne. I'll say this past year we got to partner with the League of Women in our community and NAACP, and then we were also able to reach out to our local NPHC graduate chapters to help come to campus and be a partner to help get students registered. So I think definitely engaging your community outreach is amazing. So we were able to reach more students than before.
That's awesome. It's good to have off-campus organizations that you can partner with as well.
And I see we have 2 responses in the chat. So Zainab said, in UNCG has the Office of Leadership and Civic Engagement, which is very helpful for helping college students register to vote, especially those with recent address changes. Melissa Richard says, in the Greensboro community, Guilford for All is a great organization that educates folks on issues in the community and helps with voter registration and advocacy. Also, the beloved Community Center in Greensboro advocates for greater access to voting and has a long historical presence in the community. And then Zainab says, I think there's a need for voter registration access in communities of new Americans or non-English speakers. Many are eligible, but do not have the access of the language barriers. And then Joe says, I have been a part of sending out postcards to registered voters to remember to vote. It's great.
That's awesome. So many good responses.
Mhm.
So it looks like a lot of people in this webinar are already familiar with different organizations, but hopefully sharing some of those ideas helps us to increase that knowledge. So on this next slide, which I accidentally clicked on too early, we're just going to go through how you do register to vote. So first, you check your registration status. You can go to the North Carolina State Board of Elections voter lookup, and through that website, if you are registered, it will show you your registration status and where you're registered to vote and different poll locations. If you are not registered, then you can choose to register online or by mail. Online, you can go through the North Carolina DMV website, or by mail, you can find the PDF to fill out at the North Carolina State Board of Elections website and mail that in. Right, so next, absentee ballots. If you're in a different state for college, traveling, etc., you can still vote in your resident state with an absentee ballot. These are especially common on college campuses because of so many students coming in from different states. Make sure you look into your resident state's laws before requesting your absentee ballot. To request a North Carolina absentee ballot, make sure to request your ballot online or by mail at least 7 days before the election. You must complete the ballot in the presence of two witnesses and return it by 5 p.m. on election day. All right, so next is make a plan for when you vote. You start out with deciding when you're going to vote. Look up your local election days in advance. Don't forget about your local offices. They affect you and your community just as much, if not more, than the federal elections. Mark your calendars for all upcoming elections and make the time to vote. Early voting allows people to vote in advance, offering more hours and the opportunity to register to vote on site. Look up early voting days for your elections in advance. Once you know when to vote, then you decide where to vote. You can look up your polling locations at the same voter lookup site where you look up your registration status. If that doesn't work for you, look up other locations in your district. Most polling locations are at local schools, churches, government spaces, and community centers. Once you know when and where, plan your visit. Look up any ID requirements for your state ahead of time. Plan transportation, work hours, childcare, etc. for that date. Making a plan can help you reduce barriers within your personal life and make you more likely to vote. Right, and then Look up your local elections. Local elections affect your community directly. Get involved, learn your candidates' platforms, and vote for the future of your community. You can access this website, youcanvote.org, for more information on how elections affect you and others. And don't forget to talk to people. Talk to your friends and family. Encourage community members to vote when you can, and share this information to help others get involved. Another suggestion is to be a poll worker. Poll workers operate the polls, check in voters, assist with voter registration, set up and close down sites. Poll workers are compensated for their time, though you may need to apply to learn what rates they pay. The only requirements are that you are at least 17 years old and a registered voter. Finally, you can link up with community and civic advocacy groups in your area. Some examples are Guilford for All, Vote 411, and different college voting groups. All right, so now we're going to be discussing how different student organizations were able to overcome voting barriers on their campuses. So we're just going to start out with High Point University. At High Point, we have HPU Votes. This campus organization is run by student volunteers who work to increase voter registration and representation on campus. The two main barriers they sought to overcome for HPU students were transportation and having a lot of out-of-state students. HPU does not have a polling location on campus, so students have to travel to their polling locations. Many students rely on campus shuttles for transportation, and they struggle to find rides for things like voting. Our campus already had shuttles running to local stores on specific dates to help accommodate these students, and HPU Votes helped to address this barrier by organizing for campus shuttles to run to local polling stations during early voting and election day. The second barrier was the number of out-of-state students on campus. Students coming from out of state may have a more difficult time finding absentee ballots, mailing them incorrectly and on time. So to address this, HPU Votes had people table in our different student centers and lobbies, and they asked people if they were registered to vote and made sure that they knew how to register, had access to the forms, and were able to fill out the absentee ballots correctly. They also had people sign up for Turbo Vote, which gives them direct resources on how to fill out a ballot, how to find their absentee ballots, and then how to make sure that they get in on time. It also sends you notifications when it comes up to your local elections to make sure that you don't miss a single one. Right, and then another case is at A&T. So students at A&T have worked for incredible voter access reforms in the past few years. In 2016, A&T's campus was split into 2 congressional districts. Based on the part of the campus you lived on, your polling locations were different, your political representation was different, etc. The split made it so much more difficult for students to get rides to polling locations, find their registration status, or find information about their campus or candidates. It split the campus's vote into 2 districts, a decision that the North Carolina Supreme Court agreed was unconstitutional. The legislators were ordered to redraw district lines due to unlawful partisan gerrymandering. Not only were the district lines redrawn, but A&T students protested and petitioned for a full polling site to be added on campus. This site would be operational for primaries and general election days with early voting options available. Their efforts helped remove the barriers of gerrymandering and transportation for students, increasing access to voting on A&T's campus. All right, so after hearing those accounts of how students in North Carolina work to increase voter access, we're going to discuss how different campuses and communities can work for change. So to start us off, what voting barriers are in your community? When you're thinking about your community, think about how people of different abilities, income levels, family statuses, etc., access voting. So if anyone wants to think about that just for a moment, we can talk a little bit about the High Point community. Some barriers that we have are definitely transportation. In High Point, we do have a bit of an issue with public transportation. And so if you don't have access to a car of your own, accessing polling locations is definitely an issue that we have. We also have a pretty significant Hispanic community, as well as a pretty significant immigrant community. So access to
The
language barrier is definitely an
a
issue
big
for us.
problem.
So if you have any ideas or just want to add in the chat, see. Transportation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's a big one for all campus because like not all of us like bring our car on campus. So
Mhm.
yeah.
I would say I think it's also the fact that folks that have to work, that absolutely cannot get off during the day or when the polls are open is tends to be a barrier, which I think early voting, of course, is helpful for that, but not for everybody.
Right. Absolutely.
So we can mail in ballot, right?
Yeah, there are mail-in ballots,
Yeah.
but that's not always accessible for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, there has been some movement over the years. I mean, this has been going on for decades, where people have advocated for election day, particularly like the big federal elections being a holiday, so that folks who do work could have the day off and be able to go and vote, rather than having to try and get there either before work or after work. I know for myself, I vote usually way early in the morning on my way to work. But if I don't do that, I probably wouldn't get there. So I think, lobbying for it being a national or a state holiday would be a great way to do that too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then in the chat, transportation again, many students are working in addition to classes and are not aware of the mail-in or early voting, so they miss their window to vote.
This is Allison Walker.
Mhm.
I think there are other countries that also give like a voting week, to make accessibility more open. And then for another advocacy organization that I work with, we've had success using like social media, like a Slack, to coordinate like volunteer sort of Uber drivers. So that's something that could happen too, if you could get everyone that agrees to do that to complete a training and then use social media as a platform to be able to access, volunteer transportation the day of.
That's a really cool solution. So I guess that falls under our third question that we had here. What solutions would help this issue in your community? And definitely crowd organizing different transportation solutions is a big one.
I have one more question for a discussion is that in High Point, we do have a lot of non-English speaker population. And with that language barrier, how can we overcome that, so like those non-English speaker can like vote?
I would say I think that's when a lot of community organizations, particularly that serve specific communities and they're trusted partners, right? A big issue obviously is trust often in our communities. And so I think it's so important that that groups that serve particular immigrant communities or ethnic communities, that they prioritize voting as well and help people, maybe even you can get you can download the ballots in advance and then maybe help people navigate exactly what they would like to do. I've always thought it would also be interesting if student groups from specific ethnic backgrounds or just students would come together, and that would be almost a service project, that they would reach out to those communities and maybe even if there's not a ballot that's translated, do some of that. It feels like it would be a really cool service learning project or a service project for students.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then we have a couple in the chat. Physical challenges make voting difficult. Polls are supposed to have handicapped or accessible voting, but often there's no one there to help folks that drive up. Definitely. So I think that falls under the voting barrier that we discussed earlier of poll workers not being trained properly, and not being able to make the poll site accessible. And then Church World Service, a refugee resettlement agency based in Greensboro, recently tried to solve that issue with a group voting day where non-English speakers were invited to come and have language support. That's awesome.
So, yeah. One more thing is that when I asked like my community, like, why are you voting? And a common answer I would get is that, why should I vote? It's not like my vote matter. So how should I respond to that? Like, how can I change that mindset? How can we change that?
And I think that falls a little bit under what Adrian was saying earlier,
Yeah.
where voter education is really a big part of that. While people might have access to registration, making
Mhm.
sure that they're educated about what
Candidate is.
and how their vote matters is really important as well.
Also, you can give very specific examples, especially in North Carolina. There are some local elections that have been won by 11 votes. And if you, I mean, this is not a joke. You literally can change the city council in your community based off, particularly in local elections. And there's evidence of that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Adrian?
You know, back in 2018, I had that question. I got that question a whole lot. One simple response I always gave was, if your vote didn't matter, why are they trying so hard to strip that right away? Usually it gets through to the recipients when I, point that back out to them. I mean, because it's very true. If your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to have so many restrictions and so many barriers to voting. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think there's one more in the chat. Yeah, great
Great
response.
response.
All right. And unless anybody, let's see. I was just going to move on to that Q&A chat. Okay, so what made you passionate about voter access as a college student? Let's see. I'm trying to remember what initially sparked the topic of this
Want me to go first
webinar.
then?
Why don't you go ahead? 'Cause
Okay.
that was a while ago when we started this webinar.
It's been a couple of months. So as like an immigrant, it's have always been a part of us to like, I have always been told like vote, vote, vote. You might not see the change now, but you will see it later in the future maybe. And also the high school that I went on, we really take like serious in like election whenever there's like a local or state election. Our teacher always say like, have you registered yet? How old are you? Are you going like pre-registered? And we also do campaigns and poster. And I went to an early college, so our campus was like on the college campus. So we also went around and like asked college students like, hey, have you registered to vote yet? If not, then we can help you. So, and then we also have like buses that take students that can like are eligible to vote to like the nearest voting location to vote. So it have been like a very big part of me. So yeah.
I think for me personally, what really sparked the passion for voting was attending local government meetings. So like city council meetings. Once you've sat in on a city council meeting and you see who's representing you, once it's so like up close and personal and you can see the people who you've voted in, it really encourages you to want to participate in the election process and make sure that the people who are in positions of power are really representing your interests. I also think that doing a lot of service work really sparks that as well, because you see the direct impact of local government ordinances. So.
All right, so we have a little bit more time. So if folks have other questions, feel free. It looks like one just pop up. Yes.
How do we as educators help students to be more engaged in voting?
That's a hard one.
From the student perspective, I can talk about what HPU Votes has done in the past couple years. A lot of HPU Votes was student-led. And it was more of working with administrators to see what we could do to try and encourage students to vote. For us, it's a lot of tabling. I did that last year, and it was a lot of almost getting in students' faces to be able to ask them.
Go up to any student that you see and like, hey, have you registered to vote yet?
But also, I think removing barriers is a big part of that as well, because we used things like Turbo Vote, which I mentioned earlier, and that literally will notify people like days up leading up to the whatever elections are coming up. It'll send out text messages and ask them, have you voted yet? Have you voted yet? Have you voted yet? And so really making sure that it's the first thing on their mind, I think from my perspective is pretty helpful, as well as getting students involved in the access, as well as getting students involved in the access process. So having students be the ones to organize transportation, or having students be the ones to organize the tabling. So once you get the students involved in that process, I think they're a lot more willing to participate and get others too as well. But if any educators in the webinar want to answer that one as well, that works too.
Yeah, I'll just share that the research is, it's mountains of it now that proves that when faculty make it part of the culture, like if they take out time in class, if they're asking students regularly, if it's just an expectation, like you get a sense as a student, wow, this is an expectation at this campus, or this is part of our culture, that it really does make a difference. So certainly the student peer-to-peer is the strongest, factor, but the campuses, particularly in the NSOL, the National Study on Leadership and Voter Engagement, the data shows that faculty have a key role in that as well.
Because I actually vote at my polling place on election day, it's just, I don't have kids, I don't have the barriers. I always wear my sticker, because I do it usually before work. And so I just wear my sticker in class. I don't even have to say anything. It's just like, clearly I voted that day, just to show I'm engaged in my community, and I believe that voting is important. So, yeah.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments for our wonderful presenters?
I think there's one more in the Q&A.
Okay.
So how do you think social media could be better used to increase voter turnout among Gen Z and younger voters? Well, as a marketing student, I guess that's my question. As far as social media, just the more widespread it is, the more effective it's going to be. So whether that's a student government organization starting the campaign and then pushing that to other organizations on campus to see and make sure that it's the most widespread it can be. I know HPU votes, we are very heavily supported by our SGA, and so any social media posts that HPU votes creates are pushed all over the place. So social media is definitely a help. By nature, any student, any school social media is going to affect those who are already the most engaged in campus culture. So it will be harder to reach people who are already less likely to vote. A lot of that will have to be a lot of peer-to-peer relationships, I think. If anybody else has thoughts on the social media piece, Adrian?
Also, I think social media influencers, if they could utilize viral moments to inspire people to go out and vote, I think that'll be a creative way to get people out to vote.
Absolutely. Almost like the ice bucket challenge, but for voting.
Right.
But I think that's definitely an important piece with trying to communicate with Gen Z and younger voters, especially since the younger voters are the least likely to actually vote. Pushing things like that on social media is really important. All right, does anybody else have anything? I think that's all the Q&A. Any questions, comments, concerns?
So I'm going to share in the chat. Last year, a campus in Cleveland actually did a challenge. It was called Rock the Polls. And so they had a local rapper who created a video, and then they challenged people around the country and around the state and on other campuses to actually upload their videos. So I think it would be really cool if we had a North Carolina version of that. So I'm just throwing that out there in case anybody's interested. All right, so if there's nothing further, I hope everybody will use their reactions to thank Kassidy and Jenny for such a wonderful presentation and for their great ideas and their suggestions. And thank you all for your engagement.